I just realized the more I got into later junior high and high school, that suddenly it felt like playing had stopped. And this really concerned me. And it concerned me not only because it felt like things weren't quite as magical, but it seemed like it was not good for anybody. It seemed like that the students that I knew of in my life, like my classmates and other people, nobody was happy. Like it seemed like people had lost their sense of joy and wonder. And it also seemed like teachers weren't happy either. And I remember thinking at one point, like, nobody is benefiting from the situation. So who decided that, we should stop all the play and do other things? You know who made it.
All right, so we are back for another episode of the Non-Diet Companion podcast, and I'm really excited to have my friend Shelly Johnson with us today. Shelly is a philosophy professor at Georgetown College. She teaches and researches on ethics, philosophy of education, environmental ethics, and philosophy of play, which is why I brought her on today. She's the author of the blog Love is Stronger, which I highly recommend, and the books Argument Builder, Discovery of Deduction. She was a co-author on that, and Everyday Debate. Before returning to graduate school, she was a middle and high school humanities teacher for over a decade. She earned her PhD in philosophy at the University of Kentucky and wrote her dissertation on education and the good society. In her free time, she enjoys walking, hiking, juggling, and hula hooping. And so without any further ado, hello.
Hello. It is good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. You had a post recently on your Facebook account that reminded me that I needed to get you on the podcast because I'd been thinking about it for a while because you do so much with this philosophy of play, and you're always sharing your own playful activities that you've engaged in, and you talk a lot about that and the benefits of it. And I have to say, what's really interesting, so for the listeners of this podcast, I talk about intuitive eating and a non-diet approach to nutrition and everything. So listeners, this is one of the people who early on, when I was still very caught up still in a diet approach to health and nutrition, that there was I made a comment on a post. I don't remember the details of it, but Shelly made a comment and she questioned me on it. And it caused me to go dig deeper into the topic. And it was actually one of the key things that started me going down this direction. So I'd never mentioned that to her. So she may be surprised to hear that. But just so you all are aware, I that was pretty cool. So and I appreciated her questioning me on that, and it made me rethink my position of where I stood, and then that's where I am today. So,
yeah. Well, great. Well,
tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So I'll gear these topics especially towards philosophy of play, but then also intuitive eating, because that's been a really big part of my journey to, I guess, developing a better relationship with my body and myself. And so I actually love seeing your stuff, Jeff, that you post about it, because I think it's so important, especially because you also gear your ideas towards men a lot. And I think that men aren't always I don't think anybody's necessarily excluding them from these conversations, but I don't feel like they're invited as readily into them. So I'm really glad that you're doing that. But so just a little bit about me. So I guess you've read off a lot of the important stuff. Maybe I can tell you a little bit how I got into philosophy of play, if that would be okay.
Absolutely. That's
perfect. Good. Okay. So I'm wondering if some of my story will sound familiar to you and to a lot of your listeners, but maybe this part is different. So I grew up in Oregon. I was born in Portland, Oregon, and also lived a lot in rural Oregon. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And I feel really fortunate that whoever the people were reading and studying that educated me and developed the camps that I went to in Oregon, these people were really serious about play. So I remember vividly in my elementary school in Portland, we had so much recess, and we did really cool things like unicycle, walk on stilts, play with juggling equipment. There were bars on our playground that we got to do some gymnastic stuff on that I think today would probably be considered dangerous. But honestly, all of that play that I did on the playground when I was little, that really helped me so much in developing confidence, a sense of myself. And just the belief that I could do hard things and sometimes scary things, but do them in a way where I was being wise and considering the risk involved and making wise decisions. So that play gave me a lot of confidence. And the camps that I went to did the same thing. Like we did a lot of kayaking and canoeing and hiking and swinging out in forest on these big swings that, again, I think a lot of people might consider dangerous today. And maybe they were a little bit, like maybe they needed to rein it in a little bit. I did high ropes courses too, but those experiences were pivotal for me in learning how to be confident with myself, and also just feel a real sense of joy in the world, and feel like I honestly had the feeling when I was younger that the world was a magical place full of adventure, and I didn't know what was going to happen from day to day, and that was a good thing. And I don't mean to say that my life was perfect, because it wasn't. I had a lot of difficult things in my life, just like a lot of people, but I did have those really vivid play experiences. So this is maybe the part where you and others can identify with this. I remember very clearly in fifth and sixth grade thinking one day, what has happened to all the play? Like, why aren't we playing anymore? And it not only was the situation where I felt like there was less play at school, I realized suddenly that we weren't playing outside as much. I grew up playing a lot of marbles and hide and go seek outside, and riding my bikes with neighbors, neighborhood kids. And especially, I'll say, especially in seventh and eighth grade. And in eighth grade, we moved to Colorado, which is eventually, Jeff didn't live in Colorado. You lived in New Mexico, but I ended up meeting you at camp.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that Colorado was a bad place. It was a beautiful place. I just realized the more I got into later junior high and high school, that suddenly it felt like playing had stopped. And this really concerned me. And it concerned me not only because it felt like things weren't quite as magical, but it seemed like it was not good for anybody. It seemed like that the students that I knew of in my life, like my classmates and other people, nobody was happy. Like, it seemed like people had lost their sense of joy and wonder. And it also seemed like teachers weren't happy either. And I remember thinking at one point, like, nobody is benefiting from the situation. So who decided that, we should stop all the play and do other things? Okay. I can also tell you, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute, that I equate growing perfectionism in my life with this specific time period.
Oh, wow.
And I think it was in part because of a decrease in playfulness. It was because of a lot of other things, just growing up as a girl in a society which was really image dominated, and very specific types of images for women were considered valuable and whatever. But I can definitely tell you that as play decreased in my life and in the lives of my friends at this age, something had to fill its place, and perfectionism for me was what ended up doing that. And I think that for a lot of kids it ends up being other things. If I think play is one of the ways that young children develop a sense of control and autonomy in their lives. And when we take that away from them, they have to fill that with other things. And for some people like me, it was perfectionism. Well, so I'll come back to that in a minute. Let me just say, for the folks that are really interested in intuitive eating and body issues, that perfectionism did not help me in any way cultivate a good relationship with my body. And in fact, it really did the opposite. And I can, I know you have read this, I think maybe seen these, some of these articles on my blog, but on my blog, I talk about how I developed what I would call disordered eating habits. And I don't mean that I had a full-blown eating disorder. What I mean instead is that I developed a lot of anxiety and control issues around eating and exercise at this time. And, it involved other things like an obsession with doing well in school and an obsession with how other people thought of me, all of these things. But definitely this perfectionistic development in my life was bad for my relationship with my body. So I think that my sadness over the disappearance of play never really left me. And it's interesting that I became an educator, and looking back on my life or on my educational practice in middle school, I really tried to make those classes playful without really realizing what I was doing. Play was always a really important part of my classroom. And I think it's because I sensed that that was really how I had learned best when I was younger, is when things were playful. Interestingly, too, when I was a middle school teacher, I regularly gave my students recess, and nobody ever complained. Like, I never got in trouble for it, but I did it regularly because I was like, you know what? Look, these kids cannot sit in their seats and just focus all the time. Like, they need to be able to go outside and play. And I had been really fortunate that briefly for a while, at the end of when we lived in Oregon, I went to a small school where we had recess in 7th grade. And that was one of the best learning environments that I ever was in. So again, I want to say, like, for all the parents out there who maybe think, I need to make sure that my students are in school more and do homework more. I actually think what students need are really rich play experience combined with some really rich education experiences, and both are essential. So I already kind of had in my mind that I was going to rebel against this trend of play disappearing in life. And I went to graduate school eventually, and lo and behold, I started reading all of these philosophers who said, hey, guess what? Play is a crucial part of human existence, and people need to play. In fact, that's really what they're doing in all of society. They're either doing it well or poorly. So I won't get into all the philosophy unless you ask me to and talk about it more. But I'll tell you two important things. So first of all, a lot of people might not know there's actually a virtue of playfulness. It's called eutrapelia, and Aristotle, the classical Greek philosopher, writes about it in his book Nicomachean Ethics. And eutrapelia for Aristotle is wittiness and conversation. It's a balance between being a buffoon, joking all the time and not being able to be serious, or being a bore. And by a bore, he doesn't mean B-O-R-E, but that's kind of what he's getting at. Somebody who just can't find humor in anything, and certainly doesn't want other people to have fun either. Mm-hmm. And so the eutrapelos for Aristotle, eutrapelos is actually defined as the well-turning soul. Like, they can turn to light things and enjoy them without getting lost in them. So that's really beautiful. And Aristotle thinks that we need eutrapelia, the virtue of play, to live an excellent, good, and happy human life. The second thing that I'll mention is, so you mentioned this in the introduction, that I wrote my dissertation on education in the good society. And one of the philosophers that I wrote about is a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. And if any of your listeners have ever had a bad experience with Kant, because some people do, don't worry, I won't go all into depth about duty and the categorical imperative. But what I will say is Kant has this book that most people never read. It's called Lectures on Pedagogy. And he was really interested in how you educate students to be moral, good people. And surprisingly, he believes that they need to play a lot in order to become virtuous and moral. And we might say, well, why is that? And the reason that Kant gives is that when students play a lot, they develop a really strong goodwill that's bent towards the good. They need to have certain play experiences, and they need to combine play with good moral instruction. But Kant thinks we don't want to break students' will or break children's will. We want to help them develop a really strong will that's bent towards the good. And drawing on the philosopher Rousseau, who really influenced Kant, Kant says, you can't have a good man unless you have a good street urchin first. And I think what he's suggesting is you need to have a child with a really lively spirit that you then funnel, or not funnel, that you guide and form in the right direction. And when I read that, I was just blown away because I realized, aha, this is why play is so important, and this is why I was right to be concerned that play was disappearing from school. It's because play is the arena in which we develop a strong will as human beings and the confidence that we can carry out our good projects in the world. And I don't want to get into too much more philosophy other than to say that a lot of philosophers suggest that it's not just children who need play on a regular basis. Everybody at all ages needs play, that it's an essential part of our lives. So I feel like that's a good stopping place right now, just to let you jump in.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's interesting how we tend to think about play as a childish kind of a thing. Oh, that's for kids. When you grow up, then you start to be responsible and you start to take care of business and you provide for your family and you become successful and you accomplish these various things. And play is really downplayed and if anything, it's looked down upon in many circles as something that is somewhat childish. And it's really interesting. Before we got on here, we were talking a little bit about my change from ninja to climbing and that kind of thing. And I see climbing as play. It's basically a big playground. I was just at the climbing gym this morning, and it was basically like climbing around on jungle gyms for an hour and a half until I was completely exhausted. And and ninja was really interesting too, because there were a lot of people who, and I think in particular that particular sport is a good reminder for a lot of people with it. So if somebody is listening and you've been thinking about trying it, go try it. It's really fun. I had to stop because I was having back issues, but anyway, there were so many different things that reminded me of being on the playground. You would swing from bars, you would swing from rings, you would jump off of things, you would jump and catch things, you'd fall down, you'd hurt yourself. And sometimes, you'd fall and it would hurt and you'd get up and you'd keep doing it. And, I remember a guy, he was running and he didn't notice a bar in front of him, broke his nose. I mean, just these kinds of things that as adults we're like, oh my gosh, that just sounds dangerous. But no, it's playful. And you can do what you want at a level that you want, and you can expose yourself to the amount of risk that you're comfortable with. And it just it was such a reminder of the lack of play that I think I had in my life for a period of time. And it was just a good reminder of how important that is. And of course, in seeing your posts about you like taking up hula hooping and doing these kinds of things, and then just talking about one of the things I love when you talk about your walks is that you talk about these little things that typically are associated with like a kid, like, hey, look at this cool rock I found, or oh, look at this interesting tree, or I saw this bird sitting over here. And I think that childlike, that we often call it childlike wonder. I think unfortunately, as I'm kind of thinking through this as I'm talking, I don't think that should be thought of as childlike. That should just be a human thing, that we are in awe and in wonder. And I think that translates over into the play part too, where we don't think about it as a childish thing, but rather just a part of the human experience, regardless of how old we are.
Yes, that's so good. And so I want to relate what you just said, Jeff, specifically about how play shouldn't be something we just think belongs to childhood, and wonder, childlike wonder maybe should be just maybe translated into human wonder. So I bet that there are some folks in your audience that are like me a little bit who, on the one hand, you hear ideas about this like play and wonder being an important part of all of life. And then you get a little nervous and you think, okay, but is this legitimate, or am I just, getting excited about this for silly reasons? Well, I wanted to assure folks there's actually some modern psychological research that backs up what philosophers have been writing about for thousands of years. And that's when I get super jazzed when philosophy and modern psychology meet. So here's the first one. Some folks might have heard there's a movement in psychology called positive psychology that's really focused on human flourishing. And one of the major figures in positive psychology is I believe he was Polish. He's recently passed. He has a he was Hungarian. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He has a very unusual name not unusual, it's just perhaps unusual to people who grew up in the United States speaking English. But if you're, if that name doesn't ring a bell, what will probably ring a bell is the concept of flow. So Csikszentmihalyi, this man that I'm talking about, he dedicated his life to researching people who often seemed unusually happy, even in spite of really difficult circumstances. So he lived through World War II, and he really got interested in noticing people who were able to bounce back from the horrible difficulties. I don't know if I want to say bounce back. They were able to move past those really, difficult experiences. And what he noticed is that there were some people who were able to somehow cultivate this experience he called flow. And flow is optimal experience for human beings. So a lot of musicians and artists really live in a constant state of flow. So flow is a situation where you set goals for yourself that are challenging, but they're just challenging enough where you know that you can meet them, and the goals are intrinsically motivating for you. So it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks about your goals, and it doesn't matter if they make you rich or famous or anything. They're meaningful goals to you, and you can achieve them, with some challenge. And so you live in the state of flow. And flow is really interesting because it is a state that kindles wonder and curiosity. And it's also a state in which we often lose sense of time. So if you've ever been enjoying yourself in an activity and you suddenly realize that 3 hours have passed and you don't know what happened, in a good way, not in a bad way. So that's flow. You're in a state of flow. You were involved in an activity that was valuable to you in yourself, just in itself to you. And it was challenging, but not too much. So here's the point. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi discovered that there are some people that have what's called an autotelic personality. So people who have this autotelic personality, they tend to view life as a series of these meaningful experiences that they've created for themselves that they can achieve. And so they get into flow state really frequently. But you can also cultivate the ability to get into flow. So being an autotelic personality, that's something you can practice and cultivate. And when you live in that state, it often helps you move past difficult situations because you tend to craft, in some ways, I don't know if I'd want to call it an imaginary world, but it sort of is, but it's a meaningful, legitimate imaginary world that helps you feel like you have control to some degree of your life and you're engaging in meaningful activities. And if anybody's wondering, like, how in the world does this help people bounce back from difficult situations? I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes when I've gone through really difficult situations, I have thought to myself, okay, how does this help me grow as a person? How can I use this to help me become like more kind or compassionate or loving or curious or whatever? And suddenly when I look at the opportunity that way or the experience, it doesn't take away the pain of it. Rather, it's a way that I take that experience and make it mine and make it becomes something that I want it to be, and I learn from it. And I actually, as you're probably aware, grew up with a really amazing example of this, because when my mother and father were newly engaged in their 20s, they were in a really traumatic car accident that left my mother permanently paralyzed for her whole life. And, you know, people have all sorts of responses to being in traumatic accidents, and all of those are valuable and legitimate, because my goodness, what a difficult situation. But honestly, I've watched my mother my whole entire life look at her disability and figure out a way to use it to help other people, or to teach her compassion or perseverance or courage. Those are really the traits that I see with my mom a lot. And interestingly, the activities that demonstrate the most with my mom are playful. Like, even though she is a paraplegic, she goes swimming on a regular basis, and she loves swimming. Like, it's the most, like, she's the happiest when she is swimming. And that has been a way for her to overcome this obstacle of paralysis and demonstrate courage and hope, and also play a lot. So I think that I've had this experience of watching people get into flow to help them overcome difficult situations in their life. And especially for my mom, it's often related to play situations. So that might be another good place to pause.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's an important thing that a lot of people can take that and look at that when they start looking at ways to add movement back into their life. A lot of people who we work with who are struggling with body image and relationship with food and that kind of thing, it's all a result of this diet culture, that diet mentality that focuses on changing the size and shape and appearance of your body. And so everything revolves around that. And so things that could be playful are not, because it's like the grind that you're doing. And swimming is a perfect example. Some people swim to lose weight. Other people swim because it's just fun. The same with climbing. I am climbing now not to lose weight. I'm climbing because it's just super fun. There are other people there who it's part of their weight loss regimen, and I kind of wonder what's going on in their head. That's different than what's going on in my head. And I think that's I think that's an important distinction there, is that, if you're thinking about adding in some physical activity, which is just incredibly beneficial for us just at a physiological level, not to mention all the emotional and psychological and social and all of those other facets of health, but trying to shift thinking into what could I do that I could see as being playful, because it's then turns into something that you can't wait to do. Like you look at kids, exactly right. They can't wait to get outside. It's like, it's recess, yes, and you go run outside and play. Or the same with climbing. I'm like, I get up 2 hours before I even plan to go there, because I'm awake and I'm excited to go. And I'm like, I wish the gym was open, but it's not yet. And just that kind of motivation. And it's a very different thing than motivated to go do that for the purpose of changing your body or something like that. Back to your mom briefly. I remember her doing the puppets and everything too, which was a wonderful, playful thing. And just total side note, your mom and my mom actually went to school together.
Yes, she has told me this. Yes, that's exactly right. So we go way back without even knowing it.
They were little kids playing together in a little tiny town in Kansas.
And I remember that. That's great. Well, I was gonna, build on that idea that you just said. That's so important, that I think a really wonderful part of intuitive eating is this emphasis on joyful movement. And I don't know if intuitive eating folks always say playful movement, but I think that in part it's what they're getting at. They're asking us, hey, look, remember that moving doesn't actually have to be about changing your body or punishing yourself or making up for what you ate. It can just be fun. And building on your rock climbing experience or your climbing experience. So about 3.5 years ago, it was during the pandemic, and I have lost track of when that was. Was it yesterday? Was it 5 years? I can't remember. But the point is that I suddenly realized I need to go outside more. Like I just have been inside too much.
Mhm.
And I saw online this challenge to walk 10,000 steps a day. And you know what, Jeff? I have seen this mentioned before of
Mhm.
walking 10,000 steps a day. But somehow there was something in my brain when I saw that that said, this is my challenge. I will take up this quest and make it mine. And so I actually have been walking 10,000 steps a day for like whenever the pandemic was, 3.5 years, something like that. I don't know. Yeah. And to be fair, some days I will walk a little bit less. Sometimes I'll walk more. I was sick for a few days last week and I just had to not walk at all. But I've been walking 10,000 steps, which for me is about 4.5 miles. So I walk around 4 to 6 miles every day. And here's a little bit of backstory to tell or to illustrate what a big deal this is for me. So again, I love playing growing up. I actually at one point was a certified aerobics instructor because I really loved aerobics and I loved movement. But unfortunately, my perfectionistic side made eventually turned exercise into something that was
Mhm.
exhausting me and I hated. And so I just stopped for a while. Like I just stopped moving because I was driving myself crazy and I just took a break. And thankfully, that break was what I needed because I started playing again. Like I started hula hooping, I learned how to juggle, but I turned movement into something I could do if I wanted to, or I could let go of if it was not serving me. And because I did that, I became really good at listening to when my body was saying, this is too much. You're using this to punish me. This isn't fun anymore. I don't like this. And I would say, okay, I'm backing off. That's fine. We can play whenever you want to. We can move whenever you want to. So by the time I read the 10,000 steps a day challenge, I didn't even think about that as exercising. I mean, to be
Mhm.
honest, I just thought that sounds like fun. And so I teach environmental ethics in a class I designed called Forest Philosophy. That's a whole nother story. It's kind of a playful approach to environmental ethics and valuing nature for just what it is in itself. So I was primed to just go out and have fun being outside. And that's what I do now. So, when you mentioned a while ago that you like me, or pardon me, that you like, these kind of childlike posts that I do, like, here's a cool rock I saw, here's a cool bird that I saw. It's because that's what my walks are now. Like it's like looking at the clouds or seeing how fast I can walk because it's fun. Or the other day I went to the park, which is by this lovely river where I live here, and I made up this thing called weird walking that's a combination of shuffling and skipping just because it felt good. And the funny thing was, there was this guy on the other side of the park walking, and I thought, I wonder if he's going to think this is strange. And then I thought, I don't really care. I'm just going to do this. And then I looked back over with him at him, and he was walking backwards. And I like to think that my weird walking kind of inspired him to do his own weird walking himself. Who knows? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
So
I
that
love
really,
that. It's that mindset you went into,
mhm,
and I think so much of what I talk about to especially clients one on one, when they'll ask me, "Hey,
mhm,
what do you think about this, or should I do this, or is this a negative thing?" It's all about intent. So the
mhm.
intent. So the whole
Yes.
10,000 steps a day often gets demonized, especially in the non-diet space, as being diet culture, this diet mentality stuff. And it's almost frowned upon to give yourself the goal. Now,
Yes.
may not be overtly said, but it is somewhat implied. And based on the way that I hear other people ask questions about things like that, I can tell that
Mhm.
that's the way they're taking it. They're
Yeah.
taking it like it's a, oh well, I can't eat a salad because that's diet culture. I can't
Yeah.
wear a step counter and walk 10,000 steps a day because that's diet culture, which it can be. It can be very
Yeah.
detrimental, or it
Yeah.
can be like what you've done, which is I'm taking up the challenge, and then what you do
Yeah.
along the way, which is something that if someone's, I think, concerned that maybe it's going to turn into a diet type thing again,
Mhm.
is maybe mindfully try some of those things that you're doing, which is look for things to recognize and then share with other people. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you're doing it
Yeah.
consciously or if it's just, I have a feeling it's just the way you are and you're just kind of like, oh, I just saw
Yeah.
this cool thing and you're sharing it. But I think
Yeah.
other
That's
people
probably right.
could approach it from a bit more of a mindful perspective where they say, okay, I'm
Yeah.
going to look for 2 interesting things on my walk and then I'm going to write them in my journal or something like that. So that could
Yeah.
help with that playful aspect. Or it's like that. I'm going to walk. I'm going to do 1,000 steps today, walking backwards, or I'm going to skip
Yeah.
500
Just because it
steps or
sounds
something.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's right.
different things like that, I think, can be a great way to shift your mindset and your mentality about those things. Because I think one of the things I talk about a lot too is that if you're not feeling a certain way, implementing actions can often then get your feelings in alignment with where you want to
Yeah.
go. You see it in
Yeah.
relationships where they feel like they've fallen out of love, and by through
Hmm.
various actions they sort of fall in love again. Those feelings
Yeah.
follow. And I think that can happen with play too, is maybe at first it doesn't feel like play,
Hmm.
feels maybe forced or awkward, but through different
Yeah.
actions, maybe you can kind of turn it into play. Now, kind of
Yeah.
coming back to
That's
your
right.
college course, do you cover any of
Hmm.
that kind of stuff in there about
Yeah.
getting into a
So,
playful mindset?
yeah. So it's really interesting with my college class because it's technically a philosophy class. So we are studying philosophers, a play, which means that students are often reading these challenging works and we're discussing them, which often feels like not play.
Yeah.
Um, but so what I try to explain to them is that we're both learning about play and we're also going to practice play. And so I try to do this in a number of ways. So, first of all, one thing that I do that especially, so I'm teaching a class right now, and I'm not going to mention any of my students' names for their privacy, but I'm just going to dedicate this podcast to them because they've just really helped me so much in thinking about play. But I do these things called thought experiments. And thought experiments in philosophy are where you present a puzzle, and I'll tell you one in just a minute, that you just don't know how to answer it because it seems like there are multiple ways to address it, or
Hmm.
because it seems to propose a problem with a common way of understanding an issue. And then you explore it together, and there's no grade attached. You're just doing it because it's interesting. So again, the thought experiments are valuable for their own sake. They're an autotelic activity, and autotelic means valuable for its own sake. Okay, so here's one. Um, so a lot of people will say play is any activity you do that is autotelic, that you do for its own sake. Now, on the one hand, that strikes us as right, because when we really get into play, we realize that we're caught up in an activity and we're not doing it for any reason. Like when I was weird walking, I wasn't doing it to impress anybody because nobody was going to be impressed with my weird walking. It was just because it felt good. So there's something really right about playful activities being autotelic, but here's the problem. If that's the case, that all autotelic activities are playful, that seems to imply that serial killers, when they're doing their heinous acts, are playing, because a lot of serial killers do what they do just because it seems valuable to them for its own sake. Like they're just really super jazzed about what they're doing.
Hmm.
And like nobody in my class feels comfortable with saying that serial killers are playing or playing well. And so we spent a whole entire class almost the other day exploring that, and one other class before exploring another thought experiment I'll tell you about that I made up recently called Bobby the Robot. But with a serial killer playing, we spent most of the class just trying to figure out why is it that we tend to think play is autotelic, but we don't think that serial killers are playing or playing well, even though their activities are autotelic. And eventually, you know what they said? This just excited me so much. So eventually we decided together that serial killers are not playing well because they are taking away other people's right to play, and nobody has the right to take away anybody else's right to play. So what they're doing has an element of play, but eventually they're destroying play, and that's not true play. True play welcomes more play infinitely. So that was really good. And then
before you move on,
yeah,
that
yeah.
thought experiment, did anybody bring up whether parents and teachers can act in that same way where they're denying play by through their expectations? I was curious if
Yes.
anybody said anything about that, because
Yeah.
that just popped in my head, was like,
I get that.
we can actually do that.
Yeah, for a minute I thought you were going to say, did anybody bring up that parents and teachers can be serial killers? And I was like, well, that took a dark turn.
Yeah, I was watching Dateline last night. Yeah.
Right. Oh my goodness. Well, actually, so first I'm going to say they actually didn't bring up that topic, but in part why they didn't is because we had recently watched a TED Talk by a modern psychologist named Peter Gray, Grey. And boy, if you want a really impactful TED Talk, his TED Talk is titled The Decline of Play. And he has really significant research that suggests that since the 50s, play has radically declined in children's life, especially outside play, and that there has been a significant, like an alarming increase in anxiety and depression. And you want to hear something crazy? He has research suggesting, and people shouldn't take my word for this, they should check it out themselves, but he has research suggesting that children today are more depressed than in the Great Depression, and they are more anxious today than kids were in the Cold War. So I kind of butchered that first part, but kids today are more depressed than kids in the Great Depression, and they're more anxious today than kids were during the Cold War. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but Gray says that there's actually a really strong correlation, I guess an inverse correlation, you'd say, between the decline of play and the increase in these things. And he says it actually does not correlate with things like economic downturns or other things. So we don't see like, oh, the economy goes south and then anxiety, depression. That's actually historically not the case. It seems to be strongly correlated with the decline of play. So I bring that up because we've already been talking about how, unfortunately, out of the best intentions, frequently, parents and teachers will crush, students' abilities to play. So, so I guess we got sidetracked by all these important issues. But let me just say one more thing about my philosophy of play class. So it's just right, as you can imagine, that we try to have some play experiences in class. But that's tricky because to play well, kids have to feel safe, or even college students, they have to feel safe, they have to have trust, and they have to have the ability to opt out. So if I'm truly going to teach a play class that is truly play, students have to have the ability and the freedom to opt out of playing. So how I do that is when we're doing thought experiment discussions, I never force students to talk about it. It's something that we just discuss together. And then we have what we call our outside classroom. It's just a green space right outside the building where I teach. And we go outside, and sometimes I just tell them to take a walk and look for something playful. The other day, which I think you read about online, I was talking about a play form called a lynx. And a lynx is when we have a momentary shift in consciousness, and it can be extreme or it can be more mild and gentle. And children simulate a lynx. They cause a lynx in their life, like by spinning around or rolling down hills or doing cartwheels. So I told students about a lynx, and I told them that I was going to roll down the hill and do cartwheels, and they were welcome to do those things if they wanted to. And some of them did. I did, and laughed my head off. It was hilarious rolling down a hill, and some of them just watched. And I could tell that they weren't quite sure what to think or do, and that's okay, because by the time students reach college, they've often had the play beat out of them.
Yeah.
So they really, it takes some a while to warm up to that. So I hope that makes sense how I try to both teach a philosophy of play class that entails some unplaceable activities, but then also create a place where people can play.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's so important. And I love those thought experiments that you do. I think those are wait, as you were talking about that. I mean, that's a lot of times that's what the coaching relationship is me
Mm,
coming up with something like that where we pose a question and then we talk about it.
mhm.
An example is how often should I weigh myself? There and well what are you weighing yourself for? What are you going to do
Yeah.
in response to the number you see? Is it always bad?
Yes.
Is there a reason where you would want to, and all of those kinds of
So good.
things. And
Mhm.
I think that those thought experiments are really helpful. Now, before I
Yeah.
want you to talk
Mhm.
more about that, the links. We were talking um, about that
Those are
in our
oh,
discussion ahead of time.
mhm.
But before we do that, you got to tell me this Bob the robot thought experiment that you said you that you
Yeah.
had.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that because it was really fun.
Mhm.
And I noticed we froze up a couple times. Hopefully that won't happen again, but it's
Yeah.
fine if it does.
Mhm.
So here, yes, we actually got into flow in class in this. I'll have to tell you what that was like in just a minute. But so Bobby the robot, here's the thought experiment, and then I'll tell you why I made this up. So, where computer engineers have developed a very lifelike looking boy named Bobby. And so, if anybody has ever seen the recent horror movie Megan, which is actually a super good movie, this is a little bit like this. But so Bobby kind of looks like a little boy, and he is programmed to be able to play almost all ball sports really well with a companion, and he can even improvise in ball sports, do non-sport things with balls. So he's not going to take a baseball and bounce it on his head to like see if he can walk
Mhm.
around, but he can, catch the ball and throw it. So a little boy could play most ball sports with Bobby the robot. But here's the thing: Bobby the robot can play all these games, but he doesn't have any meaningful play experiences or feelings. So Bobby the robot doesn't feel joy. He doesn't feel happiness. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't lose sense of time like in flow and that sort of thing. And the question is Bobby the robot playing? And I'm wondering
Mm.
what you think. Do you think Bobby the robot's playing?
I don't. Yeah, I think that the
I
playing
don't think
is
so.
I think it comes from intent because two
Yeah.
people, when I'm at the climbing gym, I'm playing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A world class climber training for a competition may not be playing. And
Yes.
there's times
Yeah.
when I do things. Actually, it's interesting. There were certain things I was doing today that I didn't view as play.
Mm-hmm.
They were part of my training to improve my skill, and I
Yes.
was deliberately doing certain things that were not necessarily fun. Like I climbed this route. I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to somebody else. We both hate the thing. It's terrible. The movements are not fun, but it
I can
helps with
imagine.
certain things that can
Yeah.
improve my climbing and improve my enjoyment of it should I encounter
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of moves in conjunction with other fun moves. And so we do
Yeah.
these things that maybe hurt, or you stress your finger joints to the point where they're getting kind of sore and stuff so that you can increase your ability to be able to play in a way that's even more enjoyable later down the line. So anyway, I think that, coming back to
Yeah.
Bobby the robot, that's not
Mm-hmm.
there. It's a mechanical kind of thing. I think we can
Yes.
fall into that too, where um, where we're missing that. But I
Yeah.
think the
Good. So you
actions, though,
froze up a little.
I think
Yeah.
the practicing part of that
Mm-hmm.
could help shift your mindset. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So I'm so sorry. I'm missing all these good things you're saying because occasionally my
I know I
computer's
just keep,
freezing up.
yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry
no,
about
that's okay.
that.
I don't know if it's yours or mine,
Yeah. I don't,
but
it might. it might be mine. I just wanted to mention real quick, I think your
Mhm.
intuitions are really good about play. And one of the reasons that we talk so much about Bobby the Robot is because play philosophers try to explain exactly what play is. And
Mhm.
by the way, you would think it'd be really easy to define what play is. It is not easy. It is not.
Mhm.
And the thought experiments that I just gave you are, illustrate to, like, a lot of people will say play is a behavior. And then people say, well, no, because, then you have situations like Bobby the Robot, which I came up with, or play is an intrinsically rewarding activity. Well, it seems like that's not sufficient because of the serial killer thought experiment. And by the way, there are several others like this that we could bring up. And we talk about this in class because all of us are on board with the idea that play is an important part of a good human life.
Mhm.
But if we're going to take that claim seriously, well, we have to know what play is, and it's a lot harder to define than what you think it is. So
Yeah.
that's a lot what the class is it's what exactly is play? Why is it so important to human beings? And I like to make the argument that play is essential for all aspects, all ages, all aspects of life. I even think, so I'm working on developing this idea of a playful classroom. I would call it a ludic classroom. So ludus is the Latin word for play and games. So, and a ludic classroom isn't a class that's just marked by competitive games. I actually
Mhm.
don't really enjoy those kinds of games a lot. They're one type of play. There's a French play sociologist named Richard Colloy who says, look, there are four types of play. Agon, competition is one. Links, the one I just told,
Mhm.
mentioned, the change of perception, that's one. Alia, which are games of chance, and then mimicry. That's another kind. And then a lot of people will distinguish between play mind and game mind. So play mind is kind of like those flow experiences where you're just creating these play feelings yourself, even if you're out walking 10,000 steps. And game mind is where you specifically focus to a situation that has very specific focused rules.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of things to explore.
Yeah, there really are. I mean, just thinking about that, can a quadriplegic
Freeze it up
play,
again.
that kind of a
Hmm.
thing, and where
Yes.
now we can easily associate play with moving the body a lot and in certain ways. When if we think about it from that mindset perspective, then we start to really look at it from a different angle. I was kind of talking. I don't know how much of that you heard, but I thought maybe since we're having some of these issues, let's just wrap up with a few thoughts of how people can connect with you and maybe learn more about you. I know you have a course that you offer, your blog, and that kind of a thing.
Yes. So the main, because I froze there a little bit, what I heard you say is how they could maybe find my blog
Hmm.
and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, good. So yeah, so I'd love that. My blog is Love is Stronger, and you can find it. This is all lowercase, shellypjohnson.com, and Shelly spelled Hellly.
Hmm.
So shellypjohnson.com. And I write about play, but I also just write about a lot of things. Centered around the idea that we're worthy, capable, connected, and called to adventure. A lot of my posts, and I write some philosophy stuff, and I would love folks to check out my blog.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's a broad variety of things that Shelley writes about on there, and
Mhm.
a lot of it is thought provoking stuff to get you to think
Mm,
about different things, which I think is great.
thank you.
I think us as humans, one of the things that our society doesn't necessarily encourage is thoughtful reflection on things beyond
Mm,
just you hear what's play, oh well, it's doing this and that, and then you just kind of stop there, but rather going deeper into the serial killer example was a great
mhm.
example of how
Yeah.
on the surface you could easily answer it one way. Oh yeah, well, that's play for them, that's play. But then digging deeper
Mhm.
into really talking and understanding more about play, being more precise in the way that you think about things, and I think a lot of us can really
Mhm.
benefit in our daily lives from that that precision, that thoughtfulness, the reflection, because I think so many people, whether it's politics or any aspect of life, where we tend to oversimplify complex topics. Play seems to be a really simple topic, but in reality, after having this great conversation, there's a lot of complexities to it and a lot of nuance that we could explore.
There really is. That's way. Yeah, I had a student to say the other day, it was so great. He said, "Dr. Johnson, I signed up for this class on play. I thought, well, we'll be able to cover this in the first day." And he said, "Boy, was I ever wrong." I love that. So
yeah, it's so great whenever you can come up with a topic like that that almost, the first response, I'm sure, I kind of am curious what the response was when you presented this course idea to your leadership. Maybe they know you well enough to know, but
yeah, I think it took a while for them to warm up to it, but then luckily I had several teacher workshops where I presented small versions of ideas on philosophy of play. And you know what? No matter who I present this idea to, I always eventually get, this is so right. Like, why, like, play is so important. And so I think that really warmed up, especially for my department, who's wonderful about it. So
well, that's great. Yeah, I love that. So, well,
reason again a little bit.
I think we got most of. Fortunately, Zoom does a pretty good job of catching up. So I think I got most of what you were saying there, and so that's great. But anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to talk with the audience here. I think people are going to benefit from it immensely, especially in the context of intuitive eating and this non-diet approach to managing our health and our well-being and all of those facets of health. I think play is one of those that can address the physical, the psychological, the emotional, the social, probably in cases economic, intellectual, and spiritual, and all of these different facets of our health. And so I'm really excited we got to have this conversation.
Me too. Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. It was really fun. I always like talking about play. So
well, thank you again.